So here's the thing. Smiling Friends just wrapped up its second season, and boy howdy was it a good one. Zach Hadel, Michael Cusack, and the other wonderful creative people behind the series really have something special on their hands. And while obviously I'd love more, I can respect them wanting to take their time on this. With that being said, I wanted to make something to celebrate this little show that could. So I'm going to go through the entire series of 17 episodes and rank all of them. Please remember that these are my opinions, and moreover, with maybe one exception, none of these episodes are bad, just some are better than others. I'm sure most people watching this video have at least a basic understanding of what Smiling Friends is, but for the sake of posterity, and the fact that my parents might be watching, Smiling Friends is an adult animated series following the optimistic Pim and pessimistic Charlie as they work for the charity The Smiling Friends, which seeks to bring a smile to everyone's face. Occasionally, they also hang out with Allan, who's a bit of a wild card, Mr. Boss, who's a real crazy critter, and Glep. Along the way, they get into some wacky adventures, bizarre mishaps, and at least one murder per episode. Alright, with the premise out of the way, let's start ranking from the bottom to the top. Number 17, Mr. President. Pim and Charlie need to help the President of the United States smile, even while he's in a losing race against the iconic Mr. Frog. This is what I meant when I said maybe one exception, as by far, I think this is the worst episode of the series and the closest to a bad episode. While there are definitely elements to enjoy about it, the main problem just comes to the person the Smiling Friends are helping this episode's sad boy if you will, President Jimble. Now, as someone who discovered these guys through Oni Plays, I'm well aware Zach has a strange affinity for fat guys acting gross. I mean, the channel has a 46-minute compilation video on it called Best of Fat Dudes, and Zach makes like 75% of the jokes.
Can we write a short horror film about a fat guy who runs out of gravy? That's the last one.
The fat guy that runs out of gravy?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, these jokes are funny, but I think it's less because a fat guy being gross is funny, and more the idea of a fat guy being gross is funny. Like, when we actually see a live-action fat guy covered in gravy and slurring his words, it's just kind of gross. I'm not really laughing when President Jimble does something, like, gross. I'm just sort of annoyed or put off. The whole episode was legitimately hard to watch for me whenever he was on screen. There are still some funny jokes, though. But for the most part, this episode dragged for me, so yeah, bottom of the list. Number 16, Enchanted Forest. Pim and Charlie are sent to the Enchanted Forest to bring a smile to their princess's face. Along the way, they meet the enigmatic Mip, who's also hunting down the princess. Okay, so I may get some flack for this one, especially since this episode utilizes the godly talents of Harry Partridge and his team of incredibly skilled animators, but when pretty much every episode going forward is good, I kinda had to struggle a bit to determine which are better than others. For me, the determining factor is that I realized after starting this video that this is the only episode of Season 1 that I had no desire to go back and rewatch. I think it comes down to the fact that overall, it's not really the funniest episode of the series. This is a comedy after all. Don't get me wrong, it does make me laugh a couple of times, but it's very clear the main joke that they're building to is the twist at the end. Once you already know it though, it loses a lot of its impact. I do like how quick Pim's transformation back from Golem mode is though. The second Mip gets impaled, just whoop, back to normal. Overall, a fine episode, but definitely the worst of the fine episodes.
I can't believe after all these years, I'm finally here.
You kissed your dad on the mouth?
Number 15.
Brother Egg. Pim and Charlie are tasked with helping out Professor Psychotic, but when drama arises between him and his brother Doug, they now have to reunite these two. This episode is all the way down here to me because it didn't really leave that much of an impression. Yeah, it's totally cool that they got Joel Haver to guest star. It's always nice to see indie animators get in the spotlight. Professor Psychotic is a fun character, and Zach's delivery of this line always gets a smile out of me.
You know you can, like, create life with a woman, right? Like, fucking her?
One of the rare times that an uncensored curse word is funnier than a censored one. But really, not much in this episode stands out beyond having Joel Haver guest star. When I think back to this episode, his unique style of animation really is all that comes back to mind. And while this isn't necessarily the worst possible thing, when it comes to an episode with a guest star, I'm of the mindset that there should be more going on than just a guest star. The rest of the episode's completely fine, so it's definitely not going on the bottom of the list, but it's still pretty low. Number 14. Charlie dies and doesn't come back. Charlie gets smashed by a tree on Christmas Eve and gets sent to hell, where he needs to make Satan himself smile. This episode is a real mixed bag for me. The first act isn't really all that funny, the second act has some good jokes and a nice song that takes up most of its time, and the third act is mostly just a mundane conversation between Charlie and Satan. The jokes that are here, though, are fucking fantastic. Charlie's hellish entertainment is a perfect execution of the rule of three, Charlie's grandma is a great bit, and of course everything from God intervening onwards is wonderful. Gilbert Gottfried, R.I.P., is always a pleasure to hear. They also managed to get the Joshua Tomar in to do a few lines. Glad to see he took a break from throwing grenades into baby strollers to do this. I think my biggest issue with this episode, though, is Charlie didn't need to learn shit. He's 100% in the right in this episode. It's complete bullshit they had to go out on the night of Christmas Eve to get a tree. Mr. Basha had that done weeks ago. Still, a fine episode that brings the holly jolly cheer to the most abhorrent and terrible place in the universe.
Look, I could barely explain the nutty adventure I just went on, so I'm not going to. I don't want to talk about it.
Number 13. Pim finally turns green. Pim accidentally brings Rotten the Snowman to life, and then accidentally gives him an existential crisis. Now the issue has to be solved because Rotten is really annoying like this. First things first, I absolutely love that the title and official description of this episode are just complete lies. It's amazing. The lovely Dana Snyder lends his voice to this episode's sad boy, and I feel like that elevates it above their other Christmas special, along with it just being a hair bit funnier in my opinion. It also does do a legitimately good job of teaching the lesson of why death is necessary and giving life meaning. I could see this episode unironically helping someone who's going through an existential crisis. Some of the jokes do struggle to land a bit though, so it's not a top-tier episode. But any episode that features the actual real-life death of Bill and I, the science guy, has to at least be number 13 in the Smiling Friends episode ranking. That's just the way it is!
Wow, I love my friends, and I love my God, and I love my country, and God bless America, I guess. What else can you say?
Number 12. The Magical Red Jewel. Pim and Mr. Boss go on a magical journey to a distant land of Spamtopia to buy a magical red jewel that Mr. Boss found on eBay. Meanwhile, Alan, Glep, and Charlie need to watch Mr. Boss's son, Jason. This is an episode that would have been much higher if it didn't have a B story. The B story we do have isn't all that funny anyways. I would have preferred if we just spent more time with Mr. Boss and Pim going through this absolute crazy barbaric land. Honestly, that may have made the ending even funnier. They leave and then come back to find his son somehow looking like this. I don't know, but what I do know is that when we are focused on Mr. Boss and Pim and Spamtopia, this episode is really fun. Spamtopia is just the normal Smiling Friends chaos driven to an absolute max. It's complete sensory overload, so all you can do is laugh at it, because your brain can't comprehend any other option. I get that some people might not like that kind of stuff, but there's also some people who really like the gross-out humor of Mr. President. So how about you go off and make your own derivative work based on something made by people 50 times more talented than you? Overall, this is a really good episode with a really bad B-plot that drags it down.
What's your, what kind of loggers do you have?
Is she gonna come back? I wanted a water.
Number 11. The boss finds love. Mr. Boss gets married to a succubus, and the boys need to fix that. This episode is a lot of fun. The subversion of Brittany, the succubus, actually being really unattractive is kind of predictable for this show, but I'm not gonna act like that's bringing this episode down all that much. The main reason why this episode is so low is because I just think it's not really that great as a horror experience. That might sound fucking stupid, but you'll see in a minute why I think that matters. It's just peppered with a bunch of annoying jump scares, though it is elevated a bit by the characters' reactions. It does do a good job of building some tension through the final act, but it's over really quick. You may have noticed by now that a lot of the rankings here are a bit arbitrary. That's because, like I said earlier, I do genuinely think nearly every episode of this show is great. So while I had a general idea of where some of these episodes would go, the specifics really are just based on vibe, which episodes I just generally like better. And while I do like this one fine, there's 10 other episodes I like just a little bit more.
Gasp. That means the Smiling Friends will be owned by Satan.
Number 10. A silly Halloween special. Pim gets lost in the woods on a freaking sweet quest and needs to get back before this silly goober rips his skin off. Alright, this is where shit starts really getting good. Remember how I complained a bit about how the last episode didn't do a great job at building suspense and a threatening atmosphere? This episode is why, since this episode came out first and all and does a fantastic job of building up the horror. A majority of this episode is played completely straight and is executed wonderfully. We don't even see the monster chasing Pim down until the third act, which is just genuinely a good way of handling horror, with the monster being kept in shadow or out of sight in very creative ways. I especially like this shot just before the first jump scare. Because of the way that the scene played out, your eyes are naturally going to be on Pym, so it's possible you may even miss the forest demon crawling out of the water. And all of this buildup is paid off in possibly one of the funniest jokes in the entire series. This is also the first appearance of Charlie's girlfriend Zoe and Glep's wife, Marge Simpson. I actually forgot they gave Zoe dialogue in this episode, voiced by Zach Cadel's real-life wife, Sydney Sweeney. By the way, if you haven't watched the Season 1 commentary tracks that Mike and Zach did, seek them out. They're fucking great.
Now, legally, if you go on, like, a website where you can do, like, a people search and you type in Marge Simpson, there's, like, 100 results. So, legally, technically, we can do that because there's real people named Marge Simpson that are not based off the Blue
It's
Head
just
one.
a coincidence.
It's a coincidence.
It's also, Marge is a common name, and so is Simpson.
So is Simpson.
So if I'm singing this episode's praises so much, why is it only number 10? Well, truth be told, it's not that funny. It only really has 2 jokes. 2 really, really good jokes, mind you. But that's about it. And for a comedy series, that's lacking a bit, if you ask me. I know I literally just complained about the last Halloween special leaning too hard into comedy over the horror, but listen, do you want this to go above any other episodes that we have left to rank? Do you want this above Gwimbly or fucking Frowning Friends? I didn't think so. Number 9. Desmonds Day Out. Pym and Charlie are sent to help a sad little boy smile. Meanwhile, Allan goes on a quest for the missing paperclip. Alright, this might actually piss people off. The big episode that started it all, guest starring Mike Staclaza from Red Lair Media. Listen, this episode is great. This is an amazing pilot to the series. But I think that makes this the perfect middle-of-the-road episode for the show. Pym and Charlie go on a wacky adventure, Allan gets a little side plot, Glep is Glep, and Mr. Boss is a real wacky guy. With a plethora of good jokes and a mostly positive ending, you've got a perfectly average episode of the show. Now, it's the bar that you should be judging every other episode by, so it felt right just to slap it right in the middle of the list.
Jesus Christ, what is that? What is that?
I don't know.
Alan, grab it. Grab it.
I'm not gonna grab that. You grab it.
Get it now.
Number 8. Charlie, Pym, and Bill versus the alien. A totally epic corn party gets crashed by some aliens, and now Pym and Charlie need to get back home. I have a feeling this episode's getting fucking slept on. I haven't heard anyone talk about this episode since its release, but man, I love it. The first act with Pym and his UFO buddies is really funny. The drug trip animation is insane in all the right ways, and everything from the drug scene onwards is just amazing. I love the reveal that the aliens were just fucking with them the entire time, and they're just massive assholes. They're not evil, they're just dicks. The ending is also just hilarious to me. I don't know, I just really like this episode. I guess the main reason no one talks about it too much is because there aren't too many memeable moments. I know that sounds kind of stupid, but seriously, every episode going forward has had at least one part massively blow up on the internet. Maybe I'm just missing them, but no one seems to be making too many posts about the fucking alien skateboarding game.
Pym, I've known you for 7 years, and I never thought I'd say this to you, but I'm gonna go ahead and fly that alien saucer.
Charlie, I support you 100%.
Still, I love this episode, and it's my list, so it's going up here. You don't get to disagree with me, asshole. This is my video. Go fuck yourself, I'll kill your wife! Number 7. Shrimp's Odyssey. Charlie and Pym need to help out a little shrimp after his girlfriend leaves him for playing too much Mouse Quest. We've all been there before. Okay, I know I said this already, but we're really getting into the good shit now. Everything from this point on was really hard to pin down. Shrimp's Odyssey guest stars David Firth as Shrimp. And man, this episode is really, really funny.
How do I look, yellow man?
You look like you're about to tell your friend not to come to school tomorrow, man.
The A and B plots do a great job of showing off Pym and Charlie's different points of view, with Pym trying to reunite these two lovers, and Charlie trying to get Shrimp to move on. It also features the best Smiling Friends character ever, S'more, rest in peace. It even does a good job with sentimentality. It's nice that Pym decided to actually do the right thing in the end. And you'd think this might go in a more cynical direction, but no, it actually works out for Shrimp, even if this was a mistake. Negatives. I guess I wasn't really a fan of the whole Pym needs glasses bit. I think even the writers realized that, which is why S'more is the actual bookend gag. And I guess the love montage went on a bit too long. Yes, I didn't care for one of the jokes and one scene. That's really how fine the hairs were splitting are at this point. Number 6. Allan Adventure. Allan is sent on an important quest, but finds that things just can't go his way today. This episode's just really fun. Watching Allan get constantly shit on for something as mundane as paperclips is a fine enough premise already, but the sheer levels of absurdity we reach makes this one hell of a ride. Combine that with them really flexing their animation skills on us makes this episode a great ride. It also introduces Alan's rival, the landlord. If I had to critique it, I guess the Bigfoot pissing joke wasn't really my thing, and the action really feels like it peaks halfway through with the helicopter shootout. Feels like something this intense should have been the payoff instead of just a halfway point. But still, a damn fine episode that only leaves us with one question.
I was just wondering if you wanted to hang out with me and smoke weed and fill our bellies with diet soda and play Burnout Revenge for the PS2.
Number 5. Gwimbly Definitive Remastered Enhanced Extended Edition DX4K Anniversary Director's Cut. Featuring special guest star Gwimbly, Pim and Allan need to team up to get his groove back. With a title like that, how can't this be in the top 5? I think the main strength of this episode is Gwimbly himself. Like, we've had sad boys we've sympathized with in the past, but I'd argue that Gwimbly is genuinely the biggest underdog so far. Like, yeah, Desmond was more depressed, but before this episode, he was just presumably a normal dude. Gwimbly was a video game mascot, though, who ended up getting chewed up by the system and left to do cameos in his iconic Gwimbly dance for scraps. They make the CEO in this episode just such a fucking cunt, too, so you really want to see Gwimbly win. The animation on Gwimbly and the rest of his PS1 buds is also fucking stellar. Maybe it's just because when most TV shows reference video games, it's either old 8-bit shit or something that's very clearly just some random 3D animation that wouldn't even be possible to play. But I'm really impressed by how accurate these characters look. Even when we see the Gwimbly game played on TV, it looks like an actual PS1 game. Now, while it is a fun idea to see Pim and Allan on an adventure together, Allan really doesn't add that much. I get that's by design, he wants this shit over with even more than Charlie usually does, but it just kind of leads to him not really adding all that much. But this episode is damn strong even besides that.
See you now.
What? She startled me.
Number 4. Mr. Frog. The iconic Mr. Frog just ate a TMZ reporter, and in this universe, that's a bad thing. So Charlie and Pim need to go and rehabilitate his image. This episode is fan-fucking-tastic. This was the first real episode of the series after the pilot, and boy did they come out swinging. Mr. Frog is unironically an icon, and him now being a recurring character is great news. He's just so funny, just an absolute agent of chaos that cannot be contained. It's also a nice change of pace to have Charlie be motivated to help the episode's sad boy, which just makes it all the more funny when he just keeps fucking up in new and unique ways. I also love the fact that Jimmy Fallon is their absolute last resort.
Jimmy Fallon drinks so much booze, his name's Jimmy Fall on the ground.
I know at this point I'm just pointing out the plot and then listing jokes, but honestly, Smiling Friends is at its best when it gives us a simple plot, a character to root for, and then just fires joke after joke after joke on all cylinders. The only really critique I can think of for this episode is I feel like the commentary with the producer guy is very, very on the nose. I've seen some people make an argument that that's on purpose, but good job, you still made an incredibly on the nose argument. Outside of that, though, this episode is great and gives us Glep's only B-plot. There really are only a few episodes that can top this.
Hello, 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 filthy.
Number 3. Frowning Friends. After the Frowning Friends, a rival charity opens up across the street to the Smiling Friends, everyone's world gets turned upside down. Okay, I have very few negative things to say about this episode. It's just fantastic. Much like with the Allan episode, they take this simple premise and ride it out as far as humanly possible, with the Frowning Friends basically taking over the city and becoming dictators. Pim, Charlie, and Mr. Boss being the only real holdouts by the end of it. Well, okay, Pim and Mr. Boss, Charlie's just in it for the ride at that point. If I had to make a criticism, it's that I guess I'm not the biggest fan of the big joke at the end, just being that they're racists and that's why they're doing it. You know, I get that the message of the episode is that the people who utilize nihilism as a shield to prevent criticism of them not improving their own lives, just saying that everything sucks so why even bother, are assholes who just don't want to take responsibility for themselves. I get that. I just think that could have been done without going to that extreme. But then it comes around with the fucking Renaissance Men bit, and listen, I won't spoil it for the few who haven't watched it, but by God, that joke had me on the fucking floor the first time I saw this episode.
Do we still have to detain you?
Probably not, man. I think the guy pissed in his pants.
This episode is nearly perfect, only really being overshadowed by number 2. Who violently murdered Simon S. Salty? After the freaking epic character of Simon S. Salty gets murdered in his own restaurant, Charlie and Pim are on the case to solve the murder and bring justice to the world. What I say next, I say with no hyperbole or exaggeration. In terms of jokes per minute, or just jokes per runtime if you prefer. This is, without a doubt, the funniest fucking thing I have ever seen in my entire life. Every scene, every joke, hell, almost every fucking line of dialogue in this episode makes me laugh. Even when the dialogue itself isn't funny, the delivery just cracks me up. I'm starting to laugh just thinking about it.
Fast food should be greasy and make your heart palpitate.
Yeah, but I'd never break the sixth commandment, dude.
Smiling Friends is a comedy first and foremost, so it's absolutely doing something right when every line that comes from a character's mouth gets a smile on my face. The story is also pretty good. It's a genuinely great mystery. None of the twists come out of nowhere, they're all properly set up. And while the twist ending of Enchanted Forest hampers the experience if you go back and watch that episode again, I feel like the same just cannot be said for this episode's twist, or if it does, it's to a much lesser extent. I really don't know what else to say, man. This episode is a genuinely good murder mystery, and genuinely hilarious. It's the closest thing to a perfect episode of Smiling Friends I think we've gotten so far. Well, closest with the exception of number 1. Smiling Friends go to Brazil. This goes beyond the greatest episode of Smiling Friends. This may be the greatest episode of a TV show ever made. The drama is rich and palpable. Everyone is written with the realness of a Coppola film, yet with the personality of a Wes Anderson film. The scene where Allan had to choose between saving Glep and his long-lost brother Balin is peak television. It brought me to tears. I'm not even going to say anything else because I would just hate to spoil this absolute achievement in cinematic television. So yeah, that's every episode of Smiling Friends ranked. You know, even though I already adored Smiling Friends, this video made me somehow appreciate it even more. Like I said, there's really only one episode in this entire show I'd even consider calling bad, but beyond that, even low-ranking episodes like Brother Egg, sure, they're not fantastic, but they're still pretty alright. I know that most shows would kill for a 16-to-1 success ratio. So, did any of these rankings surprise you? I can tell you I was not expecting the Alien episode to get as high as it did, but when I ended up listing them all out, it just ended up being that high. How about disappoint you? Enrage you? Do you have your own ranking of Smiling Friends episodes? Let me know in the comments. I'm always open to a discussion on these sorts of things. I'm Sir Strongman, and that was the thing.